Hi, and welcome, Janet, to the Stories Behind Empowered Women series. And you'll be kicking off the new year. So we're putting this video out on the 1st of January. So I think this is a great emphasis to the year ahead. So I've spoken to you many times, and we connected in a group online. And I was fascinated with what you do. You have your podcast, which is In the Right Time, isn't it?
The right word, yeah.
The right word, that's it, yeah.
Word, yes.
So, and so just explain to the viewers what you do, a little bit about what you do, and then I'd love to dive into your story to find out why you do this.
Well, first of all, Amanda, thank you ever so much for inviting me onto your show, and Happy New Year to everyone. 2019 is going to be an amazing year for everyone. And yeah, a bit about me. We met, and you appeared, and going to be hopefully appearing again on The Right Word show. It is a podcast and a YouTube, so you can listen to the audio or you can watch the video when I speak to other empowered women, authors, writers, and word lovers. And right now I've got a series starting about self-love, self-compassion, self-talk going on at the moment, because these are all important things to us and all involve words. So a little bit about me, my background. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the middle of the Troubles, and as I now know, as a highly empathic, highly sensitive and then child, I was very much impacted by what was going on around me. And it really was growing up in a war situation. And it wasn't normal. It was my normal for living there. I talked to anyone, it was the norm, but it wasn't normal. And for me particularly, I couldn't understand why there was this hatred between people, why there was this bitterness, why there was these bombs going off, why there was these shootings happening. It was really quite frightening. And I've realized growing up then that I was so afraid. I was constantly living in a fear. And I mean, we talked about this before, but one of the things that really, really helped me to survive or to get through that, to cope, was stories. I devoured books. I was an avid reader ever since, actually my first reading book I remember at school had my name in it, and ever since then I was hooked. I've gone, wow, my name in the book.
So that was obviously Janet and John.
It was, yes.
That was my first book as well, and I was that inspired me so much as soon as those words became visible.
Exactly. You could read them, and you could start to read stories yourself. I mean, I just basically, I would hide away, I would sit up a tree, reading books. I love stories, I love adventures. Alice in Wonderland was one of my all-time favorite books, because she dropped into this other magical world with all these things happening, all these amazing creatures. I mean, the fantasy side of it just was total escapism for me. And that's when I realized that stories and words and books are important, so important to me, and have been throughout my life. I realized that when I worked for a long time in London and I had to commute every day, and most people went, oh, commute, the trains. I mean, everybody knows in the UK, the trains is such a nightmare at times. But that was my reading time. That was if the train was a bit delayed, I didn't mind if I'm sitting in a seat and I have my head in a book. That was longer I got to spend in my story.
Sure.
And that helped me to sort of cope with the stresses of work and life and living in a busy city. That was my precious time.
So when you were a child, it was a form of escapism, isn't it? Because children are very resilient, so we find whatever it is, to help us cope. Yeah. So do you think that perhaps because of the enormity of the troubles that were going on around you, that really honed your focus on using your expression, your creative imagination to help you to find a way to deal with it?
Absolutely. Stories were something that just allowed me absolutely to escape the reality. I was an avid, in my head constantly, there would be stories being made up. I was, to get away from things, you'd often find me I would climb up a tree and sit in a branch on a tree. I had one favorite tree I really liked, and I would just be making up stories in my head of different worlds, different places, different scenarios, just really to help me deal with everything. Because it felt like everything around me was just, there was so much going on, you know, even within the dynamics of a family growing up, but then when you've got this other layer of this fear, I just realized how shut down I became. Like, I really sort of became so small to kind of hide from it and protect myself from it. But the books and the stories were the thing that just allowed me to, you know, I could escape and disappear into them. It was it really was so powerful and important for me.
And it's so expansive, isn't it? Because it's a place of safety. It's the way you can control your environment, because you can take yourself off to wherever you want to be. And I can really relate to this through my childhood. It was, you know, I think I remember more about my stories than I do about the childhood itself. And that's because it was such a healing space for me. So I guess that must have been the same for you. You have these vivid, you know, memories of very precious times when you could escape, and you went into your stories, into that make-believe.
Absolutely. I even remember sort of my sister, when we were supposed to be going to sleep, you know, we'd be making up sort of stories and telling each other. Yeah, that definitely was an important aspect of my childhood.
And that went on to your adulthood. So then you took that into, so as you say, you know, it helped you cope with the stresses of work. So you really went back into that and brought that into your adulthood as well, didn't you?
I think so. With reading stories and reading books were my form of relaxation, healing, my space. It was always felt like that was my important space, to be able to do that. It never felt then I was making up stories so much at that stage, because I went through, in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with primary ovarian failure. I basically, as they identified, I'd gone through the menopause in my teens, and that created then another major life crisis.
That must have been quite a shock.
The shock was phenomenal, and I think for a long time I never understood really what it meant, because I just shut down. And I really I'm looking back now and sort of feeling that, you know, I coped, I survived through the next 2 decades of seeing everyone else have their families and have their children and stuff. The one thing that I couldn't have, and it was the one thing I always wanted. I always saw myself as getting married and having kids, blah, 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 the normal. And then that was taken away from me. And I literally was surviving every day. But the books and the stories were always there. They were the kind of the thing that has been the constant companion. So
these came back to you again to help with that healing process as well. That was your coping mechanism.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I ended up reading a lot of children fantasy series. I really enjoyed how the writers put the stories together, the characters they created, and it always normally had a more sort of positive outcome. So that really appealed to me. I think that's what I needed. I needed to know that there was that there is a positive outcome, that you can get through the difficult things and you can get through to the other side.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because we're actually wired, aren't we, to be negative because of the fight or flight. So we've got that innately built into us. So I guess in a way, you know, when we've got these habitual sort of thoughts going through our minds, especially when we're going through times of grief or times of trouble, we have to find ways of coping. And sometimes we can't get out of the drama, but actually you found, and I found this incredible space, this healing space that held us, which created the positive. So you chose something that had a good outcome. You chose to be positive, to find a positive out of that. So I guess that's quite a powerful message to people who are watching this, who are perhaps going through really difficult times, that actually when we use our imagination, especially when it's a guided imagery like a meditation, but books themselves can have a very powerful impact when they have that effect on us in a positive way.
I totally believe so, because we're drawn into, if we really get engaged with the story, with the characters of what's going in it, we're drawn into that world, and we almost become part of it.
Yeah.
And as we go through the story, I mean, obviously, you know, the way stories are designed, they have sort of, you know, there's a challenge, and then they have to overcome the challenge, and there's normally a positive outcome. Not in all books, but in the books I choose to read. They had a sort of positive, and that sort of helped to draw me through and offer me that resolve, that hope, which I feel was key at that time. And it also, as you said, provided where I could step away from all the negativity that was going on. And because I find it, as someone, find it very hard to quieten my mind. People say, oh yeah, meditation, and I go, my mind never says still, but that's okay, because now I accept that's how it is. But reading engaged me enough to allow a level of meditation.
But they do actually say that, you know, because meditation is about balancing the right and left hemisphere of the brain, but reading allows us to do that. So really, reading in a form that actually allows us to relax is a form of meditation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It stills the mind from all the busyness of all the stuff that's going on around us. I'm fascinated, actually, because you brought something to me that I've just realised, that I'm fascinated with what type of books people read. That tends to say a lot about what's going on, because we draw the stories to us that help us to process. It's like, you know, when we have our dreams, we're processing the subconscious, you know, or through the subconscious, what is going on in our everyday life to find sort of resolution with it. And I guess, you know, those stories that you chose at that time was helping you with getting that happy outcome, that finding some positive in all of it. So it is interesting, if people are watching this, to actually cast a sort of an eye. I've got a pile of books. I don't know about you, but I read several books that, that looks like my bedside table.
Yep.
But I have audibles, so if I'm walking or I'm in the car. Do you do the same? Do you have several on the go at the same time?
Probably even more sometimes, yeah. But I definitely, I have learned that there's nothing beats a paper book in my hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I love the feel of it, I love the smell of it. But in our busy world, you know, I love a Kindle, because I've now got, my husband bought me a Kindle reader, and you know, I've downloaded so many books, and when I travel, that is great, because you've got one light thing to carry with you. And audiobooks, I absolutely now, I'm a big fan of audiobooks. Come on, more authors, put your books in as audiobooks.
Absolutely.
The only thing I have the issue with, sometimes I have to listen to the samples if I like the voice, because I have had on occasions where I've read the book and I've gone, I cannot listen to this person's voice.
Absolutely. That's the only downside, because it took me a long time to get used to Audible, but once I got hooked on it, it was great. But you're spot on, because the voice shapes the book. The voice shapes your imagination, doesn't it?
It does.
So it's key.
So
it's very, very important but yes, as Kindle is great, but there's nothing better than the smell and the feel, and that, you know, you've got that relationship with a book when it's there in your hands, haven't you?
Do. I mean, I guess we grew up with physical books, and that's I think that's where my first love is. I love going into a bookstore and just being wow, or a library. I remember a school trip and going to the library at Trinity in Dublin, and I fell in love with it. It was two things. I got really sad because there was all these like fantastic rows and rows and rows of books, and that I wouldn't be able to read them all. And then part of it was because there was all of these wonderful books, and I even wrote a little story later about sort of the visit to that was inspired.
And that is the quandary, isn't it? There's so much out there, and when you have an insatiable appetite for books, you know, I don't know about you, as soon as I get a new credit on my Audible, it's, oh my gosh, I've got to make a choice, and what if I've changed the wrong one? And you know, and you can't get enough, can you? And there is that quandary, isn't there? The two ends of the scale, satisfaction, and then there's that desire to have more and have to keep feeding that desire.
Exactly. And I see so many people, or hear so many people, they don't have time in their lives anymore, and it's all rush, rush, rush. And if you're an avid reader, or if you are someone who loves reading or loves stories, I mean, there's nothing better than allowing some time, some reading time in your day. As you say, there's so many ways now. If you don't have time to sit down with a book, you know, listen to Audible while you're out for your walk, or at the gym, or, you know, before you go to sleep, or, you know, there are so many different options now to tap into those stories.
I actually factor it in. I haven't got it with me, but I've got my calendar every day, and I write out all you know, my schedule of everything I've got to do, all the things that you know, my sort of, you know, I call them my sort of the rough stuff that I have to go through, going through all the emails and all the stuff that you don't want to do. But I also factor in things like walking the dog, and you know, drinking lots of water and reading, because sometimes we forget that. We suddenly realise the dog's still sat there, we haven't drunk any water that day, and we haven't done our reading. So I always factor that into my schedule as well. So it's a balance, it's a mixed balance. So I don't know whether you have to sometimes discipline yourself to actually make yourself read, or you just naturally always gravitate to a time when it works for you.
I feel at the moment I'm making time. When I was writing my book, in the full throw of that earlier, in 2018, that was most of my year, like good half of it anyway, was spent writing my book. I find that I wasn't reading so much during that time, only because when you're a writer and you have your own writer's voice, I find that sometimes then when I start reading someone else's book, it interferes with my writing voice. So I find that certainly during that period, I wasn't reading so much. I did listen to some audio books, but from the reading point of view, I avoided that, only to make sure it didn't impact my writer's voice.
That's quite interesting. I hadn't actually looked at it like that, but I've found that through stages. Your focus is only on your voice. Otherwise, you get this crossover, don't you, with somebody else's. So I mean, you know, you've introduced it because your book was released just a very short while ago, wasn't it? So what inspired you to write this book? Tell me a little bit more about the book you've just written.
I think as a child, because I love books, I always had this little secret dream of like writing a book one day, but really never believed that was possible. Even though in jobs I've done a lot of writing, but the idea of writing, particularly a fiction book, was just seemed like beyond me. And it was 15 years ago I came up with the idea of the Naked Knitting Club, which is my book. I don't know where that idea came from, but it's a lovely title, by the way. Naked Knitting Club came to me, and it's kind of set there. You know, when you know Elizabeth Gilbert talks about, you know, the muse that comes and, you know, shares these with you, and kindly it waited 15 years before I actually felt I was in the right space in myself to actually give myself permission to step into that role and actually do it. And then that was at the beginning of last year, 2018. And once I actually gave myself the permission and said, right, Janet, you can do this and you're going to do it, it all happened. Writing the book was the easy part. Every time I sat down to write, I didn't do this, I have to write 2 hours every day. I kind of went, okay, I'm going to write today. And then I'd sit down, I'd have some notes, ideas of how the storyline should pan out. But then often I would sit down and I would see something completely different, because I see it very visually as I'm writing. And then I'd be going, oh, wow, didn't see that coming, and write something different. It was actually quite a magical and quite a liberating experience.
So would you say that it was very different, the outcome of it was very different to what you probably had an idea about in your mind?
The main characters, no, they came to me very, very quickly after the idea, and they stuck right through. Actually, physically writing the chapters, some things would come up that I was going, whoa, wow, where did that come from? But and that was good because it never felt that it was forced. It felt, I think, because I've been on a spiritual journey, and what I allowed myself to do, I would do a little meditation, sit down, and it would almost be like this crown chakra would open, and then all these ideas would come through. And I never felt it was like, writer's block and you've got to get through it and force it. It never felt like that. It felt like, oh, I'm spending time with my friends today.
And I guess you really, you build that relationship up with them so much that they feel almost real, don't they?
Maybe a bit too real.
What's wrong with that?
Exactly. When you live, I have to say, can I just tell people, I live up a mountain, which is beautiful in the Swiss Alps, and we're surrounded by snow, but it gets very lonely. So my little friends were very welcome.
So tell us, why are you there? I mean, it's the most beautiful. You showed me out your window. It's just absolutely incredible, the scene. But why, why Switzerland? I mean, it's a beautiful location, but why are you there?
We were living in America before, and then there was the financial crisis, and my husband works in the finance sector. And unfortunately, it meant sort of there was no job for him in America anymore. There was unfortunately no job back in London for him, which we had planned to do. And they offered him to come to Switzerland, to Zurich, and we made a move here. Unfortunately for me, it was like we'd already lived in several different parts of the world, which has been great for a writer. But it was a point of my life when it was really difficult to start to build up a new life again in a new country, learn a new language. And for me, it was a turning point. But then I've realized we needed to be here. This is part of my journey. And we, for some time, even when we lived in America, we loved spending times in the mountains. And we've always harbored this dream of having a place in the mountains. So 4 years ago, we realized that dream. And as much as I do love it here, the energy, it's beautiful, it's magical, surrounded by nature. But for me in the winters, I'm not a big snow lover. It's a little bit challenging. But as I say now, it's a great time to write a book.
And so do you think that was perhaps the sort of kind of plan behind this from the universe that said, right, okay, Janet, we're going to put you in this place and you're in the middle of nowhere and it's going to be beautiful, but it's going to inspire you and help you go within so that you can really bring these characters to life? But do you really think that that's perhaps the mountains have helped you to engage? Because I had another lady I spoke to yesterday who also lives in the mountains, and it was the same thing. She was talking about the wisdom that comes from that. There's something very beautiful and powerful, but also very simple about living with mountains around you.
Absolutely. Growing up in Ireland, we talked about mountains, but they're not. They're rolling hills, green hills.
Yeah.
Here's, honestly, they are the Alps, and they're imposing, and it almost it makes you feel that there's something really big. And nature, the power of nature, because we're very lucky. We've got the mountains, but we've also got some great wooded walks nearby. Amazing amount of walks here. And certainly for me, from when the snow goes, like spring, through to the autumn, I love being here because I can get out, I can walk. It's just so beautiful. It's so peaceful. The energy here is so healing. And I do believe that for me, this was where I needed to come and to heal and start to get back on track to where I need to be. And as part of that, the book was part of that journey.
And I guess really, but also, sorry, just a little thought, because actually as a child growing up, rolling hills do seem like mountains to us, don't they? They're huge. So perhaps that to go really immerse yourself back into that space where you want to use your imagination like you did as a child, to make the most of writing this book, perhaps you needed something that was so imposing that it did seem like the reality of your childhood. And maybe that's how your imagination attracted this.
It might be sort of the fact that it is so different to where I grew up, that
Yes.
it was like, this is almost like me stepping into the fantasy world.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
That is that space where I feel safe.
Mm.
It also, funny enough, I have an idea for a children's series of books, and this is very much the right inspiration for that. Even my husband, when he goes out, we go out for walks, he's going, "Oh, you should have this in your book." Would write, it's a book children's series, and he goes, "This would be great." And even he's getting engaged in it now. It's quite amazing. But you're right. There is an element of, I do feel that, even though part of me, wants to be back in with everyone else, there is a reason that I'm here. And yeah, it is a very peaceful space to be in.
And so I guess, birthing these books is as well a part of how you are finding your wholeness. This is giving you that inner nurturing and satisfaction that you can actually bring something to life. And so, looking at it from that perspective, there must be a lot of people out there who are, and I come across it all the time, people who want to write, but they hesitate, they procrastinate, there's underlying assumptions or fears that stop them from doing that. From a healing perspective, you've touched on something that perhaps will help people to really resonate with this today. So if there's anything you could perhaps give as advice to help people to make that start, so that they can perhaps use this as a form of healing, what would that be, Janet? What do you think helps people to go from holding it back to making a start?
For me, it was giving myself permission. And also, I find, to get into the flow of writing, because a lot of us maybe are not into that. I mean, I do journaling now every day, and I have, I don't have the book here, but I have a lovely, beautiful journal that I bought because I went, whoa, I really like that. And I have a fountain pen that I write every day. And I started doing that long before I started writing the book. And I just find that just writing and allowing the flow of words in itself just started to come. And sometimes you can do something called automatic writing, where you just take a page and a pen and you just write whatever comes through. And just start to open that, where you allow the flow of telling a story, and allow the ideas to come in. But I think that, a lot of us write on computer, and by all means, I write on, my story was written on the computer, but I do find physically writing with a pen and paper is a great way. And you mentioned before about connecting the two hemispheres of your brain. By doing that as a physical thing as well, that is very important to step into your creative space.
Brilliant.
So for me, if you want to write, start writing. And if you can do it with a pen and paper, if not on the computer, just start just writing.
Absolutely. And I think that's lovely. And especially at this time of year, if anyone's stuck for getting you tree presents or a small gift of some sort, you could just say, I'd love a journal. And I think that's, I mean, you must have written a diary when you were younger. Is that right? Yes. Yeah. I did the same. And I still I have boxes and boxes of journals in my loft, and I have no idea what I'm ever going to do with it. Lord knows what's going to happen when I've gone and people are reading these diaries and all this stuff that's just been pouring through me over the years. But there's nothing more pleasing than having a beautiful journal. And I get very excited when I'm coming to the end of a journal. I then have to go out and buy it it's a gift to me, and it's sitting there waiting. And the pen is very important as well. I've got a bit of a fascination with pens. So again, I think this all stems back to us as our upbringing, how important these tools were to help us to create this space, this wonderland that we love to explore. So if people really want to get in touch with you and find out more, because obviously your book's for sale now, isn't it? How can people get hold of your book?
Books on sale.
Yeah.
It's available on Amazon, or check out my website at www.janetgroom.com. And there's all the information's there, how to get in touch with me, because yes, I'm now that I've gone through the journey of writing my book, people are approaching me now to do creative writing sessions, and also to help people to write their stories and write their books, which is a privilege, because helping someone to bring any story into the world is amazing.
So you can help people on a one-to-one basis as well.
Exactly. Because I mean, I have a background as a transformational coach, and I, work with clients, and I love doing that. And then I see how much of what we do there is relevant in also writing a book. So it's amazing that those are very transferable skills in that.
Wonderful. So, oh gosh, Janet, I could talk to you for hours. It's been an absolute inspiration speaking to you today, especially as a fellow writer. And I love where you live, but I understand you're going back to the UK for a spell, because this is being recorded before the 1st of Jan. So you're about to go home for Christmas. When was the last time you were back in Ireland?
Oh, I do go back quite regularly. So it was in the summer. We also then split time between my husband's family in the south of England and Kent. So I am back in the UK quite regularly. But yeah, it's nice to get that. It always feels all or nothing. It's all, and then back. Somehow we're going to get a balance in 2019. This year we are working on getting a better balance between the both.
Good, lovely. So lots of changes coming up for you then.
I think 2019 is going to be a major shift year.
Brilliant. That's fantastic to know.
But very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Janet, thank you so much for today, and I look forward to engaging with you more so and finding out about your next book.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you, Amanda, for inviting me. And Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you, Janet.